Hi, welcome. This is a reading of Walking a Rainbow by Michael Shearer, story of me and my 9-year-old son walking the Camino de Santiago. This is chapter 11, called The Ethos of Place, and begins when we awake in the morning at La Puente la Reina, Bridge of the Queen. Chapter 11. The Ethos of Place. I woke early, and so, amazingly, did Kez. A dodgy moment. Things looked bad. What? Eyes rolling upwards. Swiftly I rummaged in my rucksack for the emergency Mars bar and administered it directly to the mouth. Slowly he began to re-engage with his body. A close call. We were out before the heat had a chance to build, and Kez got his coffee fix at a pavement table by the main road. We sat beneath the leafy branches of a long grove of plane trees, a natural nave vaulted with green. They met in the middle and were lush with leaves, incessantly, delicately mobile in the light breeze. I recalled a moment somewhere in the books of Sir Cheverel Sitwell. Aestheticism was his religion. He lived for the experience of beauty. After he had seen Europe, no less, he travelled to South America in search of the Baroque. After one particularly arduous day, hunting out remote churches in the depths of the jungle, he ruefully observes that the most beautiful thing he had seen that day was the single rose in his hotel room. Soon we crossed the ancient bridge. As the bridge at Saint-Jean marks an intention, so the bridge here marks a confirmation. A bridge is a path over a boundary, a sign of acceptance, of moving further out, away from the old self, into the unknown. The elemental space of the Meseta was ahead. We followed the path near the Rio Arga once more. To our right appeared a flock of flying harlequins, astonishingly colourful birds gliding effortlessly on stiff, pointed wings. They had a bright lemon throat and back, a turquoise breast and wingtips, and a chestnut head. Bee-eaters, looping and lilting like a carousel. Immense herons flapped leisurely, elegantly over the course of the river above mists of midges. A red kite soared, threatening, high in the sky, and even the herons squawked. The sun rose higher and prepared to smelt the earth. Across the dusty path, columns of ants trailed on some mysterious pilgrimage of their own. The path curved away from the river and climbed a cleft between two red hills. We took a water break here amid turtle doves purring in the few trees. A posse of French cyclists panted through, eager to make tracks. "Claudio is up ahead of us," observed Kez. "How do you know?" "Look, here in the dust. These are his footprints, see? Completely flat sandals with no heel and no pattern." "Oh yeah, that's sharp." These breaks were so sweet. Mostly we just chatted about simple things, banal, not worth reporting. What we thought and felt about this or that place or person, the state of our feet, the shape of a cloud, the colour of the soil, how far to water or food. But we had so much time to chat. All day, every day, together for weeks. Few parents experience such a gift. We began naturally and unforced to form a bond. The shared activity drew us together, the trials and pleasures. We grew to know and like each other. Only our 6th day walking, but I felt accommodated to the landscape. It was where we lived. Checking for shade ahead was now automatic. We carried little water, never ran out, filled up when we found it, judged the time by the sun. There is something in the dynamic of walking that the mind likes. It is a regular rhythmic activity, a sort of physical chanting. The same actions repeated over and over. Breathing inevitably matches the pace, regular and easy most of the time, deep on hills. I found that the stress of work, and not just stress, but all the snarls and hang-ups that get swirled into knots of emotional energy and leave nothing to live on. All the petty angers, the trivial humiliations, the casual put-downs, the implied insults, had got pounded out by the very action of walking. Step by step went the energy down the legs, through the feet, into the good earth. The huge, deep earth could take it all, silent and uncomplaining. We moved on over easy undulating paths, flanked by stubble and vines, and one beautiful field of cultivated fennel. Feathery plants like delicate Christmas trees, with tiny yellow fruit like fairy lights, their roots earthed up like potatoes. Then, on a path of bare, parched ground, a pigeon-sized bird, soft, light orange on head, breast and back, the rest black and white stripes. With a silent touch I drew Kez's attention to it, whereupon it unfurled a crest of orange feathers with black tips in a fluid movement like opening a fan. "This world is so weird," said Kez firmly. A hoopoo, bizarre and exotic. Serauki appeared ahead, a low mole hill of roofs with a church at its summit, swifts weaving over it like a cloud of gnats. Just beyond the town, a stretch of cobbled and rutted Roman road sloping down to a ruinous stone bridge. Then the path became pulverized white dust, flanked by hard-baked chunks of cracked earth with huge spiky thistles, brown and withered. The sun had bludgeoned the blue from the sky till it had become a fierce bluish white. When we stopped to take some water from our bottles, it was too hot to drink. Lorca, the next place, is the archetypal Camino village, permanently sleepy in the baking sun. Little more than one street leading to a main square like an oven, enclosed by glaring white houses frilled with scarlet geraniums. To the right, shaded by a single plane tree, a horse trough and delicious cool water. We shed our packs and sat in the shade and munched carrots. 2 German women arrived of mythological proportions, huge Amazons fit to wield a broadsword and mate with gods. One had a knife at her belt the size of a machete. Kez, somewhat unkindly, seeing them approaching, asked me if they were going to plunge their heads in the horse trough to drink. But no, they merely asked directions for the bar and strode off for a hogshead of ale or 2. "That was close," said Kez. "We could have been sexually abused." "Might have been worth it," I said grumpily. I know people who have done the walk and say they grew more and more ethereal, more spiritually pure and disembodied. It did not affect me that way. As I came to be more present to the place I was in, more aware of my perceptions and feelings, more in touch with my body, I became increasingly randy. It became a problem. The access of new energy took that form. It was awkward. I'm not a philanderer. 23 years happily married and counting. I didn't know what to do with this strong, insistent pressure. We ate some very juicy pears and some sunflower seeds. It was my turn to choose the food. A van stopped before us and we bought some bread. A Spanish couple went through, not noticing us in the shade. They didn't stop for water. On such a day this was sinful. He was a tall, athletic young man in shorts and vest. Behind him, a slim young woman in a black dress limped painfully on. "A limpet," suggested Kez. He waited for her to catch up and then began to march swiftly, calling out what sounded like the Spanish equivalent of left, right, left, right. She did her best to match his stride and pace, grimacing. "Bastard," said Kez succinctly. "They're not going to get very far like that," I commented. Up to the road from Lorca, and it got hotter. The sun blazed at us. The road glared up at us. Soon my shirt was soaked, back and front. I thought the sun was affecting my eyes. I kept having to squint and blink until I realised it was sweat coursing down. My arms were glistening silver with sweat, my eyebrows filling with sweat and pouring constantly. There is something humbling about the Spanish sun. It is a blatant manifestation of natural power. It brands the individual with a bodily knowledge of the appropriateness of humility. "Feel this," it says. "This is unconquerable." A hard, long walk to Estella, Stella for star. We couldn't find the refuge, so we popped into the police station, where a couple of dapper and very bored coppers gave us a map and marked the route. Estella is a biggish town. The refuge was quite a long way cross town. It was a technical college, empty for the summer. A small residential campus with poorly designed blocks of stained white buildings like a 50s housing estate. The caretaker's dog, panting in the heat, chained up by the gate in the sun, no water nearby, was a sack of bones. You could see all its ribs. The fat caretaker sat nearby in the shade. A resting fellow pilgrim directed us up to the 3rd floor of one of the blocks. Here were 2 of the women from Zubiri, who had been tending the sick girl. One emerging from a shower room, a towel around her head. The other sweeping a dormitory. I nodded and smiled, but they didn't seem to recognise me. Kez rested on a bed while I took a shower. The water was very cold. Perhaps this would make me more ethereal. I let Kez sleep in the feathery tactile warmth while I went shopping. When I returned, we stretched out on a lawn beneath gathering storm clouds and ate a leisurely meal of crusty bread, English ham, cheese, spring onions and strong red wine. Then chocolate donuts and luscious Spanish plums. Back in the dormitory, every one of the tiered bunk beds was taken. One of the Zubiri women was putting everyone's boots outside on the windowsills and shutting the windows. Then she stood in the doorway, surveying her good work. No nasty, smelly boots anywhere inside. After she left, I retrieved our boots and opened the window nearest my bunk. Despite the breeze, it was still a night in a sauna amid crashing thunderstorms. Strong winds lashed the building. In the morning there was much philosophical debate concerning the fate of boots and the rights of the individual. The discussion was vigorous. Spanish is a wonderful language for a row. It crackles and the whole body is used. A few sorry-looking boots were to be seen still on the windowsills outside. Many people couldn't find their boots at all. Some people, it seems, had wet boots, inside and out, while others were bootless, reduced to wandering the wet campus in their socks, seeking their footwear outside. And everyone was a bit ratty from disturbed sleep. It was all rather chaotic. As this human storm raged around me, I lay safe in my elevated upper bunk, smug in the belief of warm boots somewhere down below. When things settled down a bit, I got up and brewed some coffee. Couldn't find my boots anywhere till I discovered that somehow in the scramble they had wandered down the corridor. For some unknown reason, 40 scouts from Seville, only a little older than Kes, arrived on a truck. Kes woke in the hubbub, was up with astonishing speed, and began rushing around, clumping in his boots, playing various games. No problem whatsoever with the lack of a common language. A child once more, with the relief of someone to play with. How could he be so articulate and mature and still play tag? It made me realise how much I'd been treating him as an adult and obliging him to act like one. I took the opportunity to wash some clothes and pegged them out on the back of my rucksack to dry as we walked. "Why are you flashing your knickers on the back of your pack, Dad?" said Kes. "Are you advertising?" We left rather late and followed the Rio Ega through a park to the main road out of town. A British car passed, GB plates, and I waved, and they looked puzzled. As we strolled along the road, I wondered how it might be possible to convey nationality solely by gesture. What could I do to say to motorists, "Look, I'm English"? The only thing I could think of was Winston Churchill's V for Victory sign. We soon turned off the road and followed a rising path to the monastery of Irache, a tourist attraction. There were coaches and a picnic area, and Claudio reclining on the grass, taking a break. Finding a face you recognise on the way is like a miniature homecoming, something familiar in the constant change. After water, companionship is the greatest human need. We sat down and he made us chamomile tea. "What's that other building, Dad?" There was a large shed with bodegas written on the wall. It's a winery. They make and store wine." He stared at the sign. "How do they make wine out of bodegas?" The path took us past neat managers' bungalows and down to the road. Down the long straight road another British car approached us, and as they came within hailing distance I greeted them with a cheery wave and Churchill's V sign. This was not entirely successful. The driver just looked confused, while the passenger made a vigorous upward thrusting motion with his right forearm. The car's horn blared discordantly. "Must be from Thurrock," said Kes. Along a dusty path parallel to the main road, we came upon a tethered donkey. We fed it carrots, and it brayed pathetically as we left. No water within its tethered range. By the road just before Azqueta, we rested by a horse trough with excellent water and a wide view back across the patchwork of fields to the foothills of the Pyrenees, looking chalky from here in the harsh sun. a dead viper nearby like a huge Bombay duck in the desiccating heat. We crossed the road to sit on a green bank and drink in the immense expanse. Claudio began to pay close attention to the vegetation. "Yes," he said in triumph, "I thought so. This is rosemary. I will take some for my rice." He cut some branches and tied them onto his rucksack to dry in the sun. For days afterwards we knew when Claudio was not far ahead, as his passage was marked by the aromatic fragrance of rosemary. A pilgrim came along the road, apparently wearing a mask with some red lines. As she came closer we could see they were the marks of recent wounds. She told us a harrowing tale of walking along with her hands in her pockets and tripping and falling, but not being able to get her hands out of her pockets fast enough to save herself. So her face crashed down into the stony dust. Then her rucksack, a fraction of a second later, hit the back of her head, pounding her face into the stones again. She was fresh from the hospital and numerous stitches, but very resolute to continue. Her will was adamant, and she was plainly more interested in plunging onward than in stopping to chat with us. She pounded away, and we remained sitting among the rosemary, letting the fragrance and the view slowly seep into us. Onward, eventually through the quiet village of Azqueta, passing a farmer wearing a black beret astride a donkey, flanked with two huge panniers of deep baskets like bass drums. He nodded respectfully towards us, slowly and with immense dignity, as we passed. His action had a natural, easy grace. It felt exactly tempered to the moment, with just that right degree of recognition, that sensitive accuracy of pace that constitutes grace of motion. How delightful it would be to always act so, to live a life of elegant rapport, in the simplest of actions as well as in the thick of troubles. A life of Chinese brushstrokes, exact and exquisite. Imagine what trust, what faith that would require. Would that not be grace? We turned off on a wide track of dull orange dust, with the Baroque church tower of Urbiola rising like a rocket in the middle distance. At a curve in the track was a dilapidated sandstone building like a lone garage. It covered a medieval well. Inside, steps sloped down to a chill pool like a Roman bath. The place felt creepy. There was a sense of mould and corruption, and no one was tempted to try the water despite the mounting heat. Littered around its doorway were broken stones that were green inside. The shade behind the building congealed the acrid stench of urine. We moved off and into a long, lonesome valley flanked by low hills like shoals of flat-bellied grouper fish clothed with vegetation like some marine fungus. The valley floor was fields of chunky, cocoa-coloured soil with stubble sticking through it like new feathers on chicks. Linnets skimmed in flocks past us, seemingly quitting the place, twittering. Puffs of dust the colour of dried blood marked the landing of the occasional wheat ear, which then stood up proudly with a military bearing, watching us pass and ensuring we did. Other than that, not a soul. On and on we walked as dark clouds massed and the light grew dull. As the rest of the world receded, the valley felt increasingly alien. We felt unwelcome here. Bales of hay, like giant Weetabix, were piled up to make the playhouses of the children of giants. Nearby a dead magpie, iridescent feathers sticking up at odd angles like an exotic wreck. We strode on in silence, in a bubble of shared loneliness. Then the storm broke. Gusty rain slashed at us. Hailstones the size of marbles pelted us. Heads down, we plugged on, splashing through rivulets of stale blood. Eventually the path turned off left between the hills, and we emerged, dripping, into the small town of Los Arcos. None of the sparse inhabitants seemed to know where the refuge was, and we were preparing to walk straight through and go on to the next village when a dubious-looking chap, like a seller of dirty postcards, beckoned us over to his house and suggested we could stay there. We walked into his large garage, suspiciously, to find it full of damp pilgrims, including all the scouts from Estella. They were opening huge tins of soup and meatballs with Swiss knives. Kez was greeted like an old friend. But the place was too crowded for us to lay our sleeping bags anywhere, so the owner beckoned mysteriously once more and showed us through a tiny garden and into a large shed. "Your room, gentlemen," he said lugubriously. "This is a good room. It has all necessaries. This hole through which we have entered is the door. This other hole in the wall here is a window. At your feet is the floor, and above your head is the roof. Everything a room needs." What he omitted to mention was the 30,000 other things that the room contained. It looked like a long-lost Noah's Ark for endangered objects. There were vintage agricultural implements of all descriptions. Spades and rakes and scythes and shears and hoes and wheelbarrows. A motley of tools propped up and laying about, saws and chisels and axes and hammers. There were saddles and bridles, brooms and bags of fertilizer. Drying herbs and onions hung up. Screws and nails and nuts and hooks were scattered about everywhere, like acorns in autumn. There was a spinning top and piles of newspapers, ladders and mattresses, drums of tar, nose rings for bulls, a lavatory seat, a sheep castrator, buckets and ropes, planks and paintbrushes, bits of bicycle, feathers, a car's engine and a battered teddy bear. The whole ensemble was sepia-toned with a layer of ancient brown dust, and the floor was littered with broken nutshells. Our host grinned shyly at us. "Now this is the business," said Kez approvingly. We shifted in our gear and swept the floor just enough to fit in a couple of sleeping bags. Back in the garage the scouts were comparing feet. Claudio was doing his rounds, looking for blisters which he relished. "Oh, now that's a lovely one," he cooed, reaching for his medical kit, "and just ready." Alone in the corner I found a bemused Italian contemplating the scene before him. "Let me show you something," he said softly. He removed his trainers and socks. "I've done a lot of walking in my time, but never before or since have I seen anything like this young Italian's feet. They were scarred with concentric rings everywhere, as if branches had been growing out of the flesh and had been broken off, and the raw remainder had healed. This man had had blisters all right, huge ones, and they had burst, and the exposed skin had half healed, and fresh blisters had formed on the tender site of the old, and these too had burst, and so on. All his toenails were black. You see a lot of injured feet on a long walk, but these took the prize. "I walked from Italy," he said wistfully. He didn't need to tell me. you could see the evidence of the miles engraved in these appalling feet. I glanced up at his face. He was gazing at the scars, his eyes unfocused, in loving admiration. He was proud of them. They were marks of devotion, a sign of his endurance, unquestionable evidence of his worthiness, branded medals of sincerity of purpose. I thought he was quite mad. Kes seemed happy with his friends, and Claudio with his medicinal good deeds, so I went off to get some food. I had trouble finding a shop that was open and could get neither fresh bread nor wine, but returned with freeze-dried shepherd's pie, doughnuts, plums, some cut bread called bimbo, and biscuits whose name I could not resist, called Mildred. I inquired about getting sellos, that's the rubber stamps for our pilgrims' passports, and was told the priest would do the job after Mass. So, after eating, we went down to the church. I thought that the best way of ensuring meeting the priest was to attend the service. The church was dark and grim inside, late Baroque carving everywhere in profusion, all knobby and curly in frantic excess. It had once been pristine and gilden, but hadn't been cleaned in an eon or two and had become tawdry with grime. It was all too much. In the effort to express exuberance, to impress the worshipper with the sense of God's overwhelming bounty and its golden worth, the builders had produced an insistent, warty monster. The spirit of our host's shed had been taken up and made pretentious and vulgar. It was like being submerged in the forgotten remains of Santa's grotto. The congregation was a few substantial old women buried in black. We sat and rose and sat and rose as the service dragged lifelessly on like a dreary lament for a rumoured joy that nobody really believed in anymore. When the service finally died, the priest smartly disappeared. One short but bulky old woman remained and tidied up. We appealed to her for the sellos. For some reason that I couldn't fathom, she insisted on showing us the cloisters. The walls were of a gentle honey-cream stone, pierced with ground-level windows with beautiful curvilinear tracery. The square beneath had been made into a flower garden. Dark green foliage with many blooms in sepulchral white and maiden's blush pink. But there was just too much of it. The small space was crowded out and cluttered with plants. It was the same spirit of rampant disorder expressed in the church and in the shed. Here in Los Arcos, people had gone about their business for centuries, and yet had regularly produced a similar ramshackle jumble. What is it about a location that can result in such repeating expression? Back in the church, I asked about the Black Virgin, which I knew was supposed to be here somewhere. With a tired gesture, the woman indicated the top of the huge mess of an altarpiece. Atop this over-elaborate stack, like a diminutive Guy Fawkes on his pyre, was a doll that looked as if it had been steeped in dilute peat. She was a grubby brown. It was impossible to tell whether the material was actually that colour or whether she had suffered the same degradation by neglect that was all around her. I had read about black virgins back home. The subject is complex and controversial, but one theory has it that there was and is a cult dedicated to the female side of the cosmic force, represented by these dark statues, some of which are a rich jet black. Demeter, dark mother goddess of the earth, who converts dead and buried seed into golden wheat, was worshipped at a cave in Phigalia in the form of a wooden idol known as the Black. She is supposed to incarnate an alternative, subversive, compensating power of the dark earth, hidden truths of the unconscious. Here, however, she was an impotent irrelevance, hidden near the shadowy roof, a disappointment. Her representative on earth reluctantly stamped our cards as if we were criminals seeking an alibi. The floor in the shed was cold. We slept on the filthy ground under sheepskins with raw, red tattered edges that we had found amid the debris. I was up at 7 in the morning and tried to wash some clothes. The discoloured sink in the garden had no plug, so I used a single pink household glove I found nearby. The fingers bloated up from the plug hole beneath the water like some drowning virgin. Behind me, white rabbits pottered about the garden, nibbling on the spinach. 4 mirrors and a picture of the Virgin protected the outside toilet. Then I went and bought some envelopes in a cluttered shop. The deserted streets were being cleaned by some men with wheelbarrows, shovels and witches' brooms. Back at the garage the scouts had gone and Kes was up. We sat on our ram's fleece and drank mint tea. Claudio snored quietly. We left him to sleep, and Kes and I were off about 10. We walked through Los Arcos and its warm, cosy smell of freshly baking bread. At the edge of the town was a litter of old roadside markers collected and dumped. Plump white tombstones with a red cap. They lay amid weeds and haphazard grasses in random disorder, like the outdated residue of many forgotten Christmases. A last echo of the ethos of Los Arcos.